Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream on the Inuit in Canada. My name is Jody Williams. I am the Indigenous Education Lead for Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board, and we're so happy to have you all tuning in today to learn about some very important information. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest for this afternoon. Koesa, who has done some work with our board in the past. We work on other provincial projects. He's been part of a provincial organization called the First Nation Métis Inuit Education Association of Ontario. And he is just a wealth of information and knowledge that he's going to be sharing with us today. We would encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions. I will be moderating those throughout the session. And please only use the chat box for that. It is moderated. Any inappropriate use, you will be removed from there. Please feel free to also share where you're tuning in from. If you'd like to do that, you're welcome to. And I'm going to now turn it over to Koesa, who will introduce himself and get started.
Hey, thank you, Jody. Nakomi. My name is Qaujimajatugangit Ititik. I'm originally from Igloo, Nunavut. My legal name at birth was Qaujimajatugangit E72529. I was assigned an Eskimo number, as did every Inuk or Eskimo that was born between 1940 and 1970. Every Inuk in Canada was issued an Eskimo number at birth and or assigned, I guess. So my legal name was Qaujimajatugangit E72529. Growing up when I was younger, the government discontinued the use of Eskimo identification numbers in 1970, or discontinued issuing them, but they were still in use for probably a decade, if not more, after, as part of that, because that's how the government kept records about Inuit. It was through your unique Eskimo number. So that's part of the living history of colonization for me within Canada. And for every Inuk that's basically 50 years and older, was assigned an Eskimo number with a disc that had the Crown Seal of Canada on it. And it said Eskimo identification number, and your number was stamped on it. And you would have to keep that on your persons. If you tried to get any services, you didn't give them your name, you gave them your number. If you wanted credit, if you wanted health services, anything, you had to use that number. So I'm going to talk about the Inuit in Canada and globally a little bit today. So within Canada, there are about 66,000 Inuit. Globally, about 165,000 Inuit. You can find the Inuit in Russia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. So basically the Circumpolar Arctic. So what Jody just put up is the Canadian Inuit. They're broken up into 4 land claim regions. Inuit did not have historic treaties with the Crown like the First Nations did. What we have is negotiated modern day land claim agreements with Canada. And there's 4 separate ones, all the way from the Inuvialuit in the Western Arctic to Nunavut, Nunavik, which is northern Quebec, and Nunatsiavut, which is Labrador. So, and again, these are modern day agreements. The first ones that were signed was in 1975 in Nunavik, northern Quebec. The Northern Quebec Inuit Association negotiated an agreement with Quebec and Canada. That was actually in response to resource development because in 1971, Hydro-Quebec put a notice in every post office in northern Quebec informing the people that they were going to build this massive, the world's largest hydroelectric dam. And they were just telling the people that this is what they were doing with no consultation, without talking to the Inuit that lived there. So that led to the development of the region of Nunavik and to the signing of the Northern Quebec James Bay Agreement. So that was the first land claim. The second one was the Inuvialuit settlement region, and they signed their land claim in 1984. And again, that was kind of led by resource development again. They were looking at natural gas and oil in that area. Originally, the Western Arctic land claim was part of a larger Nunavut land claim that was submitted to Canada in 1976. But the Inuvialuit decided to go on their own and sign their own regional land claim agreement away from Nunavut. So that was in 1984. Nunavut signed their land claim in 1993. The largest Indigenous land claim in the world at the time when it was signed in 1993. It made Inuit legally the largest Indigenous landowners in the world when it was signed. Again, Nunavut, half the Inuit in Canada live in Nunavut. Half of Canada's coastline is in Nunavut. You know, if you think about, nobody looks at the north as another coast. The Arctic coast is, you know, coast to coast to coast, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. But we don't look at it that way. Canada is very focused on southern parts of the country. The final land claim that was signed is the Nunatsiavut Agreement with the Labrador Inuit Association, signed in 2005, so it's pretty recent. Again, that was led and pushed by resource development. Voisey's Bay Iron Ore Mine is in the traditional territory of the Labrador Inuit. So taken collectively, the four land claim agreements, if you look at them and, you know, as one parcel of land, it's more than 35% of Canada's landmass. So Inuit control more than 1/3 of Canada through their agreements with the Crown. Again, it's a large area that usually is denoted, it's mostly above the tree line, but there are, like Labrador and Northern Quebec, they're below the tree line. The Inuvialuit are a little bit below the tree line when you look, but generally it's the Arctic areas and the Arctic Ocean is where Inuit reside. If you look at the 53 communities, every one of them are on a coast because Inuit use the oceans as part of their hunting grounds, as part of their ways to travel. The sea ice became like highways for your dog teams, and your now with snow machines, the ice is our highways. The ice allows us to travel fast and further away. There's only one community not on an Arctic Ocean coast, and that's Baker Lake, Hamanituak, which is actually the geographic center of Canada. So that's the center of Canada right there. If you look at geographically, that's the center. And it's the only Inuit community not on an Arctic coast. Although they are on a river and a lake, and they have access to the ocean, a few hundred miles of traveling, I guess, on that river. But that's for Inuit, the ocean is just as important as the land, because we hunt on that ice. We hunt seals, we hunt whales. Inuit traditionally were whalers, and much of our food source came from the sea, although the other half of that is that we eat a lot of caribou too, is one of our preferred animals. So the caribou, the seal, the fish, and the whale, they're the main kind of food sources for Inuit. Many Inuit to this day, the majority of the food they eat comes from the land. So they are still a hunting society. I don't know, maybe it's a good time to talk about the high price of food in the North, Jody, if you want to show some of those links you had put up. So Sunny D, everybody loves Sunny D, $34. If that was the price in Ontario, I don't think you'd be drinking Sunny D. Your parents wouldn't be buying that for you. But again, remember, there is no choice up north. Everything has to be flown by planes. There are no highways to truck goods. So that adds to the end cost of the product. Bag of grapes, $28. Amazing. It's crazy the prices that Inuit in the North have to pay. And remember, just because they're in the North doesn't mean they're not part of Canada. It is part of Canada, but if you look at those prices, it really feels like they're in another country. And again, up north, with the lack of infrastructure, they're not benefiting from the first world that Canada is. And I think that's Canada has a lot of nation building to do to bring the North as prosperous as the South is. Are there any questions, Jody?
Yeah, one question is question around, is there ever an ice highway?
Yep, like I said, there are ice roads, but generally those ice roads are linking. I know in NWT there are ice roads linking to mining projects. There's some ice roads between communities, but in Nunavut, there really are no ice roads. I know from Manitoba to Nunavut, they do transport goods sometimes through bombardiers, but it's not as normal as flying it in. So no ice roads. It would have to be a really long ice road for it to to make it to southern Canada.
Another question that's come up is, how do people afford the food?
Like I said earlier, about 70% of the food Inuit eat comes from the land. So they're hunting seals, they're hunting caribou, they're catching whales. If it wasn't for that, I think it would be a totally different story about malnutrition in the north. Again, even with the hunting, 7 out of 10 kids go to school hungry on a daily basis. So something's got to give, I think. And there is a subsidy that Canada provides. It's called the Nutrition North Subsidy. But it goes to the retailer, and the retailer, their cost of shipping the goods is subsidized, and they're supposed to pass on the savings to the customer, me and you. But this is the savings that you're getting passed on. That's with the subsidy. So if you look at the milk, it tells you the subsidy. This 4-liter thing of milk costs you $10.39 with the $10.50 subsidy. So normally this should cost $20.
So I think, this is really important, especially because we have a secondary audience. And, these are some of the current issues that you could explore with your classes. And students can be engaged to look for creative ways to draw more awareness around this, to raise, because a lot of people don't know about this. And to put pressure on, the government to address the massive inequities that exist for access to food. But the other thing too I wanted to mention as well is there's a really good documentary that if you haven't watched it, is another great film you could bring into your class called The Angry Inuk. Because you had mentioned about with in order to hunt and live off the land and have that traditional food available. But I don't know, did you want to comment on that film at all, or?
Sure. So remember I said Inuit are hunters. That's what we've always been. There is no agriculture in the north. So all your food sources come from the land, mainly animals, but we would collect seaweed and berries depending on the time of year. So at one time, the North, Inuit and Canada existed, but there was no government services. The North was basically the only outsiders up there were trading posts, Hudson's Bay fur traders. So they would buy our furs or trade our furs, and we would buy steel pots, needles, bullets from the trading posts, flour. So Inuit were able to continue their lifestyle they've always done, hunting, but while also being able to sell the pelt for cash. They got the seal to eat, and then they were able to sell the pelt to the fur trader. And then they would have money to buy other goods and stuff for their family, right? The problem was that animal rights activists and groups saw the way the East Coast fishermen were harvesting seal skins, and they didn't like that, and they decided to promote the ban of seal skins. And lots of publicity. People stopped buying seal skins. Inuit were not able to hunt and still, be able to buy gas with the money that the furs would bring in to continue hunting. And it put a lot of Inuit from being able to support their families to being on social assistance like welfare, because there was no other employment opportunities. So I would encourage you to watch Angry Inuk and look at it from a lens where an outside force can impact your whole society without really understanding the impacts they're making on you, on your people. Yeah, I think it'd be a good film to watch for you guys.
Another question that's come up here is, if the prices are higher, do jobs pay more?
Yes and no. Yes, jobs pay more in the north. The better the job, the more education you have, the better job that you will have and the more money you will make. Similar to in the south, right? The problem is the education system has not produced enough people because of the language of instruction issues. There are other issues involved, residential schools. But in a nutshell, yes, you do get paid more up there if you are qualified to get that job. The average income for Inuit in Nunavut, and they are 85% of the population, the average income for Inuit is a little over $20,000 a year. The average income for non-Inuit, which is, they make up 15% of the population, is almost $100,000 a year. So there's a huge income disparity there. Of course, it's related to qualifications and lots of other factors. Inuit did suffer through the residential school system. Intergenerational impacts of that are still being felt.
So there's a couple other ones in relation to, and I think we're going to transition into talking about. I'll just put the slide up first, and then I'll ask the question. So, and just so people know, the resource that I'm sharing here, I will share out the link to it. I've shared this out prior, but I'll share it out again so that everyone has a copy of this and can access the resources that are within this particular resource. But this is in regards to when you're talking about settlements. There's two questions in terms of heating. So the question is, if most Inuit settlements are above the tree line, how do they survive without wood?
Okay.
And the other question I'll ask, because it's somewhat connected, is what about electricity costs? Are those also high? There's maybe this is an assumption, they can't use solar power with limited access to sunlight.
Mm-hmm. Yep, solar does work, only certain parts of the year. Up north, we use diesel fuel to heat our homes. So there's a furnace, it burns diesel fuel. We have power plants in each community. What do? They burn diesel fuel to create electricity. So it's not climate-friendly technology we're using in the north. And all that diesel fuel has to be shipped up to every town and stored in massive tanks. So every town has to buy all their fuel once a year. Boom. And it's got to last them all year. In terms of because they're generating electricity by burning diesel fuel, that costs a lot more money to create that electricity. So your electrical costs in the north are almost 10 times higher than here. I think we're looking at like $38 a kilowatt hour, or 38 cents a kilowatt hour. And in Ontario, we're at 7 or 8 cents, depending on the time of day. So, you know, it's 4 times more expensive.
So this image that you're seeing here is part of another resource, and we're just going to go and I'm going to bring up these pictures individually to talk more specifically about. So maybe we'll start with the Igloo, because we can talk about that a little bit in terms of even, it's incredible how warm they are inside. So if we're talking about heat and staying warm. So I'm going to just switch over the images here. Just give me a second to pull it up. Okay.
So the Igloo is an Inuit invention. That is a house built of snow, and it's architects have looked at it and tried to come up with other designs using snow, and they basically said you cannot improve the design using the same kind of materials as insulation. So and Inuit can generally build an igloo in about 3 hours. So one man can have a house built in 3 hours, and generally they're not used as much as they used to be, but Inuit will still use them for short trips. In the past, they would build their igloos on the sea ice to be closer to their hunting grounds. And then other igloos, they could be connected together with other families. So you can, you know, have 3 families kind of living close together with tunnels connecting each other. So the igloo is built with a panak, which is a snow knife. And there is a special way of building the igloo. You have to do it from the inside in a spiral form. So building in, I guess, but from the inside. I think, are you going to share that link later on so that they can look at it later, or
which link is that?
That how to build an igloo.
Oh, yes, like the video?
Board. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So the igloo helped Inuit survive. It would actually be warmer in there because your hudlik, which is a seal oil lamp, which was your heat, made from the fat of the seal, fat of caribou, any kind of animal fat could be made into a fuel. Even fish fat could be made into a fuel that you can burn in your hudlik seal oil lamp. And because the lamp was burning inside the igloo, it would actually create a crust of ice on the inside of the igloo that would lock the heat more in your igloo and stop the wind from coming in. So Inuit still use them. They're not a lost technology. It's a great emergency shelter if you had to. And I think it's amazing that Inuit were able to engineer this using, the tools that they had, and how long did it take to come up with this design that works?
And I remember you sharing about the significance of getting that top piece in.
Yes, basically it's the key block. The last block would be in the middle at the top. It would be the highest one. But once that's inside, it actually locks the whole structure together. And then what an Inuk would do is he would stand on top of his igloo to ensure that it's structurally sound, I guess. And that's how you test if your igloo's an igloo or not. You stand on top of it.
I'd hate to be the one
after all that work.
After all that, and it caves in. Oh no, do it again. A question came up. You mentioned this, but maybe we'll re-mention it. Is how long does it take to build one?
Generally about 3 hours when built.
Like people find that surprising sometimes that it can go that quickly. But again, like it's like skilled trades.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to really emphasize the design and the engineering. So when we talk about sophisticated engineering and mathematical concepts that go into this, that people would have to know and utilize in order to make these things. They weren't just, it's not just building a snow fort. These are very technical in their design. Okay, so I'm going to put up, since we mentioned a tool, the particular tool, maybe we'll move into that image.
Sure.
So let me just get that one up. The traditional tools.
So I have one in front of me here.
Okay.
This is a ulu, which is a woman's knife. It's in the shape of a crescent, and they use it to cut all their meats. They will even use, not this ulu, but other ulus to cut the furs and leathers and seal skins for sewing. So it's an all-purpose tool that the women use. It's called the ulu. Okay, so the pana snow knife, that's what you're going to use to cut your snow blocks for your igloo. Generally about 20 inches long, if not longer, because you're cutting larger blocks. You see the ulu, the woman's knife. The savik, which is a knife, basically made for men, used to skin your animals, to cut up your food when you're going to eat. One of the things, it's not a very good, it's an older saku harpoon head. Right now they make them from aluminum, and they're actually almost artistic in a way. But that is a detachable harpoon head. So when the Inuit hunter has a harpoon, using a rope, they attach the harpoon head and they plunge it into the seal, let's say, or whale. And the harpoon head stays in the animal. But at the end of that harpoon head, there's a loop with a rope. And the rope is held by the hunter still. So the harpoon comes off, but the harpoon head stays in the animal. And because it's tied to a rope, the hunter will pull on that rope and bring the seal in. It's a way you don't lose your animals when you're hunting. You're not just injuring them, you're bringing them back. And then at the bottom, it says unak. In my dialect, we say kakivak, which is a fish harpoon. And it's got 3 points there. So you plunge that in at a river or a crack in the ice. And some of these could be 20 feet long so that you can go deeper and plunge it in. And the 2 points at the top lock the fish in there. So it gets impaled and it gets locked in by the 2 points at the top so that you don't lose your fish. When all your food is coming from the land and the sea, and you don't have a stockpile of farmed foods and rice, let's say, you can't afford to be losing your animals. So that's why you see a lot of our tools, they make sure that you don't lose that fish or that seal. Okay, go ahead, Jody.
Okay, we have a couple questions here. So one question is, where did Inuit get metal from for the tools?
Okay, good question. Because we did not forge steel. They did get steel from historically from a meteorite that crashed in Greenland, and who knows when. And Inuit would trade with those people. They would also trade with the First Nations. They would trade with the fur traders for steel, and then they would adapt it to their uses.
Another question here is, how long does it take to make the tools?
It depends on the tool. But it depends on the tool. Like the fish harpoon, you could make one. It'll take you probably all afternoon, all day, depending on the tool. The ulu, again, you got to cut the steel. You got to cut your stems. You have to make your handle and pin it all together. So yeah, it takes quite a while to make a lot of these tools. Some people are faster than others too.
Okay, we will go on to the next one. Just give me a second to pull it up. Okay, so we'll do the polar bear.
Sure. One other thing I wanted to talk about, but I'll bring it up when I'm talking about the polar bear. So the polar bear is a very feared and respected animal in the north. It's on top of the food chain. It will eat humans. It will stalk you. very dangerous animals. They're not cute and cuddly. They are not cute and cuddly. But Inuit have great respect for the bear because, it is the top predator. We have to treat it with respect because the minute you stop treating it with respect, it could kill you. We actually learned how to hunt seal pups in the springtime through the polar bear. The polar bear will jump and crash through the sea ice because within that sea ice, seals will make little dens near the surface. They'll paw out a den and then give birth in those dens with the seals out of the water. And the polar bear will come around and he will crash, jump, and break through that top layer of ice and get the seal mom and the seal pup. So when you look at Inuit, they hunt seal pups the same way. We learned from the polar bears how they did it, and that's how we do it too. And that's the only way. The other thing, when we're hunting polar bears, one of the necessary tools is a dog team. They are traditionally the way you hunted a bear is with your dogs. Because when you got close, you would let loose your dog team. And the dog team would chase that polar bear into some kind of wherever they can corner that polar bear. And your dogs will corner him somewhere, and then you come in and get him with your harpoon. Back then, now probably a high-powered rifle. But the dog teams were part of the tools in your tool chest to capture that bear. You would never go after a bear without a dog team. Now they use snow machines and they can shoot from further away. But in the past, you had to be within striking distance of your harpoon. So that means you're within 10 feet of that bear. That's why the dogs were so important for hunting polar bears, for traveling long distances on ice. The dog team without the dog team, the Inuit wouldn't have survived in the north for sure.
So a question has come up actually in regards to the sled dog killings, which is another part of colonization and the intentional genocide that's taken place across Canada. So the question, I'll just read you directly the question and then you can answer it how you would like to. Are you able to discuss the competing narratives of the sled dog killings? There are different accounts, some by the RCMP, others by Inuit groups themselves that disagree.
Yep. This came out, Inuit have a shared history of the dog killings, Husky dog killings. 20,000 Eskimo dogs were killed by the RCMP across the Arctic. So around 2006 or 7, the Inuit did their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we paid for. So we traveled to all our communities on Baffin Island, and we asked Inuit to provide testimony of their experiences with colonization and with the state. And story after story came out about how Inuk hunter would come with his dog team to the trading post to trade his furs. And then while he's in the store, the RCMP officer would come out, would be there shooting his dogs. And then he's got no more transportation. He doesn't live in town. He lives out on the land. He needs those dogs for his family, to provide for his family and to survive. You know, the testimony that we gathered, all the stories were so similar. The narrative was very similar in every town. The RCMP said that they did it to control distemper, but how does distemper travel from one town to another town 700 miles away? They got to kill their dogs over there too. So to me, the official government story doesn't jive. I believe what the Inuit are saying, their stories are all very similar, and they have the ring of truth. Of course, the RCMP investigated themselves and found that they didn't have a systematic slaughter of Inuit dogs, but
well, how convenient.
Yeah,
we'll just look at that. The RCMP investigated themselves and determined that they have done nothing wrong.
Yes, yeah.
So I think this is an important point to kind of pause on, because this is not unique to Inuit. This is the story throughout Canada. In fact, most people don't even realize the creation of the RCMP purposely was created to forcibly remove Indigenous peoples off their lands as part of colonization. And so from the East Coast to the West Coast to the North, direct violence towards Indigenous peoples by the RCMP is very real and continues to this day. That is happening. There's, this I think is another area that, again, because this is a secondary audience, an opportunity to really explore and inquire into the police brutality that's continues to happen to this day. And then the other part that is the conundrum is that when there is these gross violations and death towards Indigenous people, where do we go to deal with these atrocities? We have to go to the colonizer's court system, right? Like we have to go through. So in Canada, when there's nation to nation, problems isn't the right word, violations. How is it that, we still have to go to Canada's own court system? So it's the same thing about the RCMP investigating themselves. Mm-hmm. But still, even though, we have Supreme Court rulings that have consistently come out over the last 20 years that have sided with Indigenous nations and peoples in terms of what's been happening. But I think, when we look at these stories, and in this case, the sled dog killings, be very, very mindful as to whose story is telling, whose side you're hearing from, because you're going to get very biased answers from the government of Canada and affiliates. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, and remember the role of the RCMP in the residential school system too.
Yes.
Rounding up kids and making sure that they got on the plane, that they got on the train or whatever, and then threatening to arrest parents who didn't send their kids to residential schools. So yeah, it's a tough history, trying to keep Inuit in town and And look what we're stuck with. What kind of town do we live in now? You live in a place where there's no real infrastructure. Your cost of living is so high. And then when outsiders look and say, why don't you move? We move. This is our land. This is where we're from. So that's not an option. I think if the North, if it's truly part of Canada, then it should be benefiting from Canada, the first world. Why is the North a third world within a first world here? It's willful neglect, I think.
Yeah, and there's a big opportunity through education. And this is part of why we're having this session even, is to hopefully invoke and inspire classes to get more informed, find out what's going on, and, you know, have calls to action around it. What can, you know, dream up some amazing ways that you can, through your classes and learning through, and this is to the students, you know, your voices are very powerful and can carry information a long way. So, you know, find out about what's happening and speak up and speak out, you know, create awareness and education, share out, you know, things that you've learned today, even that you may have found very interesting or that you didn't know about. Share that out so more people become informed. So just going on, we'll just finish off on one of the graphics here. When, you know, we're talking about hunting. So we're gonna, this graphic here about the uses of the caribou.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go there, and I'm gonna screen share here.
So this is a caribou, one of the main staples of the Inuit diet, but it's not just food. You have to remember, Inuit use every part of the animal. You could put a seal there or a polar bear, and you'll see that different items are used for clothing, tools. And just for the caribou alone, there's 20 things that they make out of the bones or the skin. The thread is called sinew. It is the strongest thread you could buy, or not buy, but harvest. It's waterproof. We use that when we make our waterproof sealskin kamiks, the waterproof boots. The sinew from the caribou is a very strong thread. Like, you will never rip that. You will never ever rip that. The caribou parka atigi is the warmest parka that Inuit make for themselves. It's the warmest parka. I challenge any Canada Goose parka to be warmer than a caribou parka. I doubt that would happen, because they use an inside layer. They trap air in your jacket when they have fur. On the inside, you've got a two-part jacket. So you got like basically a vest with the fur sticking out like this, and then an outer parka with the fur on the inside. So that traps air, warm air in between the layers. They trap the air, and it keeps you warmer. Okay, so you see the little bucket. You can make the scraper from a shoulder bone. caribou fat for fuel, so lamp fat. And the tent wouldn't look like that. It looks more like a teepee kind of tent style, more efficient use of material. So I think we're good there.
Okay.
So many uses.
Yes. So I think, yeah, it's important that if we think about how we use animals today, so when we look at what's, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the indigenous peoples, all of the indigenous peoples lived, in balance with our lands and our environments. And so if we think about what's happening to today, and we're not doing this anymore, we're living, not in a sustainable way. This what you're seeing is sustainable. This is not, this is very, the animal, it's not just gone to waste. Every part is used. And this is, this is very similar for many peoples all over the world in terms of the use of animals in the land, that it was, done in a certain way, and that it was always, never taking more than you need, using everything very responsibly. And so we didn't, the world wasn't having an issue with climate change and all of the impacts of it. And so this is, we have to start to really think about how it is that we are interacting with our environment today. So I just want to add that. So the questions come up around, what are some of your traditions?
Okay.
Broad. It's a broad. Maybe
Yeah.
you want to just share about maybe one or two?
Yeah, sure. So when Inuit, we respect the animals. One of the ways, and we believe animals have spirits like humans. So when an Inuit hunter catches a seal, even if it's in the middle of winter, we will spit water into the seal's mouth before we cut him up and prepare him to eat, so that he's not thirsty on his journey to the other world, to the spirit world. Because we know that's where he's going. He's given himself to us. So we respect him by giving him a drink of water for his long journey to the spirit world. That's one example, and Inuit still do that. It's a sign of respect, and that it's not only humans that have spirits. It's not only humans that have souls. The other thing is, through our naming system, we're linked to our ancestors, our relatives. So when you see Inuit, even in -50, and they have their hood on, they will remove part of their hood, or move their hat back so that it exposes the forehead. So when they're eating, they're sharing their food with their namesake in the spirit world. When we eat, we're sharing. As long as you open this part, you're sharing your food with your namesake. So in my case, my uncle, I'm sharing with him. We're linked, because I inherited all his relationships when I became Hawisa. So when I eat, I always take my hat off, or you're not sharing with your namesake. You're not sharing with your ancestors. So that's two kind of things that are still done today.
So, another question, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but in this platform, but the question is, are you able to share the story of Sedna?
I could, but there's many stories of Sedna online too that I would encourage you to go out and look at. But the version I learned is that there was a man with a daughter, and he betrothed his daughter to a man on an island, but he was half man, half dog, but he lived on an island by himself. And the father agreed for this half man, half dog to marry his daughter. So he's bringing his daughter there on a umiak, on a boat. She doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to be married to a half man, half dog. So she's pleading with her father to not go. He pushes her out of the boat on the island, near the island, and she grabs onto the boat with her hands onto the railing. And the father cuts off her fingers and she falls back into the ocean and sinks to the bottom. Her fingers become the seals, the whales, the octopus, the sea mammals of the world, and she becomes the goddess of all the sea mammals living on the bottom. So when you're praying for good weather, good hunting, you have to appease Sedna. She's the one you have to ask to have good weather and good hunting on the ocean. But there's some really good versions. I don't tell it very well myself, but there's some really good versions online if you wanted to look. And there are small differences in the different stories, but that's what happens. You get regional variations. But basically that's kind of the story. I don't tell it very good, but you could watch online.
Although be careful with online. I was caution about that because it's a bit of a wild place. So you have to be very cautious when, going online. Got to use a very critical lens because there's all kinds of weird, bizarre interpretations out there. So just be careful. Another question here is, what is your favorite tradition?
I don't know if I have a favorite, but one of the good ones as a young kid when you're growing up is when you catch your first animal, any first animal, caribou, seal, whale. Once a year, we all go on top of a building. Like, I'm not talking about a skyscraper, a one-story building. And in the past, the parents would buy candies. Now we use candies, but in the past, it would be tools and whatever else. And the community would gather, and you would be throwing all the stuff to your gathered friends and family. And so they still do that up north. So you'll see 10 people on top of a building, and they'll announce on the radio that they're going to be doing this kind of ceremony where they throw candies and little gifts to people to celebrate their first catch. So that still happens today up north.
So maybe we'll just have this one last question because we are coming to the end of our time. although I don't want to leave on this note, so I want to I'm just looking at the question. It's a heavy one. Maybe I'll just, so the question was around housing shortages, which, you know, again, it's speaking to this, the big problem with colonization, the impacts of ongoing colonization, in terms of access and the inequities that continue to exist. And I mean, housing, this is an issue across First Nations as well. But so the question was around the housing shortage, and wondering, and there's another piece around the TB, and then now COVID. That's what I mean by, so yeah, if you wanted to try and maybe speak a little bit to that, but I would like to leave off on something positive.
Okay. Well, they're all kind of linked to
Yeah.
housing. Remember the 53 Inuit communities in Canada. Inuit were mobile nomads. We lived different places, different times of the year. We didn't live in one spot because we had to follow the animals, right? So it was Canada that picked and built the towns. Usually wherever there was a trading post and enough Inuit around that trading post, that's where they built the town. So it was Canada that built the towns for Inuit to live in. Again, in the South, if a town is built, it's around some industry or some economic activity that's happening. People are moving there. And remember, not everybody wanted to live in town too. But once, you know, with the dog slaughter and they started to provide more services, I guess, telling you to send your kids to school, then you go into town to be closer to your kids. So there are very few private markets in the North. So even if you live there, you want to buy a house, you live in a typical Inuit community, guess what? There are no houses for sale. There are none. There's no market. Mostly social housing. And that's why, you know, government doesn't like building social housing. They're trying to get out of social housing. And you know, basically Nunavut has to beg the federal government for funds to build more social housing. And they don't want to pay for that stuff. So we're kind of caught in a tough place, and Inuit live in overcrowded conditions because of that lack of housing. I remember living in a 3-bedroom house with 18 people, and that was normal. That's normal right now up north. 18 people living in a 3-bedroom house, you know, 2-3 generations of family. What happens when you live in overcrowded homes? Usually you don't have enough to eat because there's not enough food for everybody. That starts to impact your health. A high percentage of Inuit smoke cigarettes still, and they're smoking in their homes. That doesn't help. So diseases like TB spread very quickly in an overcrowded home. You know that somebody in Nunavut died of TB 2 years ago. Nobody's died of TB in Canada in years. It's been eradicated almost everywhere except the North because of overcrowded homes. And now we are seeing COVID-19 hit. Guess what? Overcrowded homes spreading like wildfire. I think there's 128 cases in Alberta right now. So Um, for Inuit to be healthier, remember their average income is $20,000. They can't afford to build their own homes. They don't have the capital to build their own homes. And I think Canada needs to step up and be a lot more involved in providing healthy environments for Inuit families, because they're the ones that wanted us in town in the first place.
Yeah, that's yes,
Yeah,
that's important to really note because again, this is one of this large misunderstanding um, that people, it feeds into the stereotype like, oh, people, they get everything for free. Why is it always the government that's got to keep providing,
yeah,
right? Like these
yeah.
are, this is
The other
not,
narrative.
yeah. And so, I think people should think about how much money has Canada enjoyed off of resources and taken illegally most times out of territories. So there's legal requirements for Canada to be fiscally obligated to there's financial obligations on the part of Canada, either through signed agreements, legally signed agreements, or not, just Canada just doing something wrong. There's billions of dollars owed, which is another part of the story that doesn't ever get told as well.
Yeah,
So
and in Nunavut's case, they actually have 4 operating mines. They have a positive GDP. So if you look just at GDP, it's a half province. It's supposed to be, but it's not, because um, it's the shareholders of those mining companies that are making the majority of the profits, with very little making it to regular Joe Inuk.
yeah. So we are come to the end of our time here. I do want to leave it on something positive though. So maybe I'm going to put up the link that you just shared about the book, The Inuit Thought of It. And maybe we can just share a few things. Like one of the things that we would love to see happening in schools, in classrooms, as part of the learning is to become aware of the amazing contributions that the Inuit has gifted the world, that often goes unrecognized or that people don't know about. So let's just talk a little bit about some amazing contributions. So I'll put this up as just as a book that people can take note of, if you want to share some of the things.
And it's not very expensive. This author used to actually be an editor of a magazine, and it's called Inuit Today. It was basically the national magazine for the national Inuit organizations. He ran political cartoons in that magazine about what Inuit were going through with resource development, resource extraction. Great commentary on what was happening in our world. Look at the Hayak, Inuit invention, the only covered boat. It's actually it's waterproof. You can go upside down in that and you won't sink, because it was designed to be waterproof by the Inuit. Very light, the ultimate Inuit hunter's tool for the ocean. The other thing they would have on there would be a seal float. Basically, they would take a whole seal, dry it, stretch it, whatever, and then fill it with air. So it looks like a huge seal balloon. And that would be tied to the line on their harpoon, so that when they harpooned the seal, the float would slow him down and tire out the whale or the seal, and you won't lose your animal. We talked about, well, actually we didn't, the snow goggles. The world's first sunglasses. Can I say that? I think so.
Sure, yeah.
Anybody else made sunglasses? So yeah, I would say they're the world's first sunglasses. And the reason you need snow goggles is from April to August, it's 24-hour sunlight. And the sea ice is there until July. And you got 24-hour sunlight reflecting off the sea ice, crystals and white. And over time, remember it's bright, it could damage your eyes because you're getting it from the sun and you're getting it off the reflection. So that could damage your eyes. You could get snow blindness from that. And that's why Inuit invented the snow goggles. Can I just say they invented sunglasses?
Yes.
So I think so.
I think so too. It's official. Yeah, so there's lots, and there's lots more that we'll just kind of leave it there for people to, look into. Have your students explore some of these amazing innovations and inventions and the technology involved in it. It's good to kind of think about even what it would have been the mathematical, concepts that would have had to emerge for people to be able to design and create these things. So, it's good to also counter the narrative that has been existing that, Indigenous peoples are very kind of, well, what we call leathers and feathers, it's that simplistic view that often is portrayed. Like, we're never portrayed as coming from sophisticated, diverse, complex societies, civilizations. So same for the Inuit. Really look for opportunities to bring forward examples of that. I think this might be, was this the other one you shared with me? Yeah, we'll just maybe, because I'll share this, I'll put this link too in the bottom afterwards. We just literally talked about this right before coming on to this live stream. So this is a new one for me as well.
So these girls are taking throat singing, which is a traditional Inuit style of music, generally performed by women. And they're blending it with modern kind of sounds, which I think is great. Who's heard of Tanya Tagak? Has anybody heard of her?
If anyone has heard, you can say yes in the chat box. There's a bit of a delay, so we'll see. But keep going.
And she was the most famous throat singer, but I have to stress they're not traditional throat singers. They are contemporary. They're mixing world beats. They're, Tanya Tagak toured with Bjork. Nobody's probably said the word Bjork in 20 years.
No, but that just was like a flashback. Probably only the teachers, well, maybe not all, depending on if you're a newer teacher, you may not know that name, but my generation for sure.
So yeah, she performed with symphonies around the world. She's got a number of albums out now. She's amazing. And following in her footsteps are these two young ladies. They actually just produced last year a Christmas album of throat singing. So that's an interesting gift to get somebody.
Cool. There you go. I just learned something. So I will, I'll add these links into once, because we're going to come to the end of our session here, and I'll pop in at in the description of this YouTube, because it will be saved, and I'll put the links in. I will also send out an email follow-up to everyone with a link to the resource, as well as these other links that we've shared today. And I just really want to thank you, Koisa, for spending the time with us this morning with the elementary students, this afternoon with secondary students, and again tonight or later this afternoon, you have a special session with teachers through the OTF. It's just so invaluable, this information, and really, really important. So I want to thank you again for spending this time with us and sharing all of this information with us today. So thank you.
Nakumi, thank you to you too. That was thank you for your time, guys.
Yes, so so thank you everyone for tuning in today. I hope you will continue looking into and learning about Inuit and Canada, and take care, be safe, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
Okay, bye. Thank you.